What is college football going to look like in 2030? And is the NCAA going to be a part of it?
College football is back. It's better than ever, and we're back on the big mountain.
Hey, it's great to have you here on the mountain. I am JY. This is my good friend Steve. An episode we have really been looking forward to. Our first in a series called College Football 2030. And in this episode, we are going to focus on the NCAA and where are they going to be at here in the next 4 to 5 years. And, I know Steve wants to go over, we're going to start with the Charlie Baker letter that was sent out in December. I think that gives us a framework and maybe a pathway as to where he wants to head moving forward and addressing some of the issues that we have. We want to go over some of the lawsuits as to maybe why he's addressing some of these issues. And just a lot of discussions, some Q&As. And then we, of course, want to end with where we actually think the NCAA is going to be in 2030. So let's not waste any more time. We talked about this Charlie Baker letter about a month ago, had our own standalone episode when it came out. I'll put a link up here if you'd like to see that. We're going to go over a little bit of it here. But what he did in this letter was permit D1 schools, all D1 schools, to participate directly in NIL deals, a massive shift of where the NCAA has been. That December 5th letter sent to all executives, the presidents, chancellors of universities. And he kind of calls this a forward-looking framework. How is he going to move the NCAA forward into this new world of NIL and transfer portal and all these other things we're going to get into in this episode. So, Steve, what are you thinking here? Let's get into this letter.
Yeah, so great summary, great recap. About a month ago or so, we did an episode on this, like you mentioned, about this letter when he sent it originally to the university presidents, executive CEOs. And then not too long after that, he also sent another letter to all kind of open-ended, but meant for all D1 athletes. An open letter to all D1 athletes. But a lot of the points were the same. So I just want to go over a few of the major points that I think are really important from his letter. And so that'll kind of get us jump-started on our conversation of where do we see the NCAA, what role are they going to have in college football when we get to 2030?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the main parts of this letter that I find important, we can kind of break it up into part A and part B. Okay. So part A, the big thing is basically his vision for the NCAA is still to be around, to be a structure, but have some kind of structure that allows all Division I colleges and universities in all sports to be able to offer student athletes any level of educational benefits that they deem appropriate. Okay. So under this, that's a huge change in direction, because before their entire role was to control what benefits that schools could give, which caused them all kinds of legal issues, which I think you're planning on getting into later in this episode. So that's a huge change. So number two, and we're still in part A. So number two here is the rules would allow for any Division I school at their choice to directly enter into name, image, and likeness opportunities with their student athletes. That means they could sell jerseys with their names on it, give the athletes money. They could just pay the athletes money for appearing on a billboard, for appearing in advertisements, anything whatsoever. Basically, the universities will be able to pay students directly NIL money. Okay, so that's kind of part A.
Okay.
So moving forward with part B. Part B, to me, is a lot more about so we'll talk about this. So in Part B, number one is in compliance with Title IX. So for those who aren't aware, Title IX, part of the U.S. federal code that says, colleges and universities must provide all types of athletes, male and female, the equal opportunities to participate in sports. So in compliance with Title IX, any universities, so this would basically create this part B would create a subdivision within Division I athletics. And if schools opt into this subdivision, in order to comply with Title IX, they would have to invest at least $30,000 per year into an enhanced fund for at least half of the school's eligible student athletes. So this is a way to ensure, your women's volleyball team, your women's soccer team, your women's, all those things that maybe are not revenue sports also get to share and partake and get to enjoy some of these benefits. And so this is a way to kind of put that money into a separate account to be able to pay those students as well. And that's really, it says right from the beginning in his framework that is in order to be in compliance with Title IX, which is hugely important.
Yes, have to.
Yes. So part 2 of that, or number 2 in that, is basically the institutions within this subdivision that we've created here would work together to create their own rules that may differ from institution to institution or conference to conference. Those rules could offer different policies surrounding areas like scholarships, roster limits, recruiting, transfers, and NIL. So this expands beyond NIL.
Yeah.
This would expand. This would give the Big Ten, the SEC, or a Power 2 breakaway, or all D1 schools, if they all opted into this, the ability to have to basically make their own rules for roster limits. If the Big Ten wanted to say, hey, we're going to have 100 roster instead of 85 scholarships, we're going to give 100 scholarships.
Yeah.
And the SEC was like, well, okay, we're going to see that, and we're going to raise you, and we'll give 115 scholarships. They can do that under these rules, which basically this is a major way that schools can offer benefits and not be in violation of antitrust laws, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the main issues, was having this. The NCAA was basically a form of collusion to get around or break federal antitrust laws. So under his proposed method or model or framework, whatever we want to call it, schools would be able to have their own rules, and that could be just the Big Ten has their own rules, the SEC has their own rules, or it could be the Power 2 has their own rules, or all the schools. So I think, those 4 parts there that we just discussed are major groundbreaking transformations in how major college athletics is operating. So those were the most important parts out of his letter, and I really think those are going to play a part into where we go in the future, how we get to 2030. I think this is going to, when we look back and we're in 2030 and we're in our 7th year of doing this show, we'll look back and we'll say Charlie Baker's letter here, this was step 1 or 2 in this entire process of how we got here.
And maybe save the NCAA.
Yeah, maybe save
Charlie
the NCAA.
Baker could be saving the NCAA.
Absolutely.
And not just him. Obviously, there's a team behind him. But yes, we'll find out for sure.
Sure.
Can I ask a couple things, or just point out a couple things I think on the letter? So the first thing I want to just say is, and you're going to hear me say this when we get to the litigation part as well. The first item that you mentioned, this enhanced educational benefits as they deem appropriate. Whew.
Yeah.
That's broad.
Very broad.
So I'm anxious to see what, if any, I guess, details they put around that. Because that is a very open-ended, both the enhanced educational benefits. What the heck does that mean? Now, you and I can sit here and define some things, but people like to push envelopes.
Yes.
And, it'll be interesting to me to see how that is regulated, if you will, or defined, and then as they deem appropriate. Again, people like to push the envelope on that. So that's just the wording there. I get he's being broad right now. It's kind of the very first step in the process. But I'm really interested to see how that all kind of takes shape.
Yeah, so I have some thoughts on that.
Yeah.
So first of all, I really think that vagueness and broadness, as you point out, is intentional. Okay, because I think where they ran into a lot of problems was having one set of standards and regulations for all schools, no matter how rich they were or poor they were, whether in this state or that state. So I really think this is going to allow, if you have a school like Texas A&M that has a lot of oil money,
sure.
You have, state of Florida that has tourism, you have, USC, UCLA that are connected into Hollywood and different things. I think that the verbiage in that, if we move forward, that we carry that all the way out, could lead to schools and conferences creating their own envelopes, okay? And maybe those envelopes are not going to match. Maybe Texas A&M is going to play by one set of rules, and UCLA and USC are going to another, and Rutgers and Northwestern another. And for us, it's hard. It's hard for, we're old guys in our 40s.
Easy.
Yeah, right. And it's hard for us to wrap our minds around that because we're used to having this NCAA framework where the point of it was to create supposedly a level playing field, which I don't think it ever did. But where everybody plays by the same rules. And I think we really need to start to kind of get our minds wrapped around the fact that not everyone's going to be playing by the same rules anymore, because forcing everyone to play by the same rules is what's got them in trouble.
Sure. And if it's benefiting a student athlete,
right,
for, food, proper nutrition, I'm not going to sit here and we're not going to make a list of it. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. But I do think there needs to, maybe it's my old man mind, there needs to be a line there at some point. And I don't know what that line is. That's why I'm interested to see if a line is drawn, and maybe there won't be. I don't know. So the other thing I did, I'm a numbers guy, and I had to do this.
So before we move, if I can respond to what you just said. So think about, I want just kind of encourage new ways of thinking.
Yeah.
Okay. So a very small percentage of college athletes go to play professionally.
Right. Yes.
At the professional.
Sure.
So what is the point of college? The point of college is to prepare you for your career going forward. So I'll use USC as an example.
Okay.
So let's say they set up a kind of a program where they got people, you have student athletes who are, they're usually very fit, good looking, whatever.
Yeah.
If you have gymnasts, you have swimmers, you have football players, you have basketball players.
Yep.
So let's say they create a program. Yeah, they give them all those other things, the health benefits or whatever, but maybe they want to give them a program that gets them a step up into getting into Hollywood, getting into TV, getting, where they're already going to get paid and do some work in those while they're student athletes. So that's one thing. There's really a whole bunch of, and so I understand what you're saying. It's, you want to see them be taken care of with medical benefits or whatever, but I think opening the envelope allows schools to get creative, because not all these kids are going to go to the NFL, the NBA, whatever, but could they work in the oil industry? Could they work in the entertainment industry? Could they do this? Could they do that? Could they get into broadcasting and journalism? So I think this framework would allow a lot of different opportunities for students.
Okay. All right. No, it's a great point. I'm going to struggle to get there on some of these points. I'm probably with the masses. This is this is out of the box on something. We're going to get to that here in a minute with some of this lawsuit stuff. But I ran some numbers on this. This goes to your point B.
Yeah.
Okay. And the $30K per athlete. And so I ran numbers for Penn State, of course, a Big Ten school, and I ran numbers for Boise State, a Mountain West school. Have to go Big Ten, Mountain West. That's what we do here. So Penn State has approximately 800 student athletes, from what I could find. So divide that by 2, because it said up to or at least a half. So divide that by 2, 400 times $30,000. That's $12 million a year that they would put into this fund. This trust,
Title IX fund. Yeah.
Right. Boise State has about 450 student athletes. Divide that by 2, you're at 225 times the $30,000. You're at $6,750,000. So just under 7. I'm going to call it 7.
Yeah.
Round up. So you're at 12 for Penn State. You're at 7 for Boise. I'm not here to compare the two schools in terms of their athletic prowess, but clearly I sit here and I go, wow, that seems a little off.
Right.
So I'm just throwing that out there for what it's worth.
So I think that's a good point. And so that really, and I'm hoping we will be able to put this on the screen for our viewers at some point there's a really big delineation between Part A and Part B in his letter in these two. So the top two being, that they can give whatever education benefits, enhanced benefits that they want to. They can pay students NIL directly if they want to. That's a separate thing. And so now we have Part B, which
is a choice, right?
Which is a choice.
Yeah.
So schools and conferences, universities can opt in or opt out. And so you make a great point. For schools like Penn State, Michigan, Florida, Georgia, Texas, Texas A&M, this is a no-brainer for them. They have the finances. This is the amount that you just talked about is
$12 million
which is the revenue, approximately the revenue for one home game for Penn State football.
Okay.
So they play 7 to 8 home games a year. So we're talking probably about 1/10 of their football gate revenue for the year. Whereas Boise, total different situation.
Sure.
So Part 2, that's really going to be interesting if they break it up like this. What schools and conferences opt in?
Yeah.
So for me, I think no-brainer, Big Ten, the revenue they're getting, every single Big Ten school would opt in.
Mm-hmm.
The question is going to be, what about the MAC schools?
Yeah.
What about Mountain West? What about the Sun Belt?
Mm-hmm.
Do they opt into this? And that leads us into further discussion of, will there be a breakaway of those schools that can opt into this versus the ones that can't opt out of it?
Yep. So I'm just going to give a couple comments on that letter. I think it's twofold. What he's doing here is twofold. And maybe I'm stating the obvious. I don't know. I think the one thing that he's doing is clearly trying to mitigate ongoing risk and litigation for the NCAA. There's fires burning all over the place. And so I think he's at least trying to get involved to show that they're trying. Will they get there quick enough? Time will tell. But it's to mitigate risk. The other thing I think is to actually push back against some of the threats against the NCAA. Now, that can backfire. I don't know. But at least it shows that they're trying. They're going to have to continue this, dare I say, somewhat quickly. I mean, to mitigate that risk, that's only going to, they're only going to give you so much time before they're going to come at you again. So, but I think it's a great first step by them. I don't know if it's going to make it or not. We're going to get to that by the end of the discussion here. But are you ready to get into a couple lawsuits as to why we got here?
Would love to, yes.
So the first one I want to talk about, kind of maybe the biggest ish, was that 2021 lawsuit, Supreme Court, NCAA versus Alston.
Yeah.
Alston. This was the one, this is the biggie, that ruled that the NCAA violated antitrust laws by limiting education-related compensation to student athletes. This then led to an interim NIL policy, which happened in summer of 2021, that allowed student athletes to be compensated by third parties. So that's where we kind of got into this whole, and that's where we've been, quite frankly. You've got these cooperatives or whatever they all have, and I just saw the big headline was the $13 million that Ohio State was able to raise, and the coach kind of said, that's what I need to put a potential national championship football team on the field.
Ryan Day said last year he needed between $12 and $15 million, so they didn't get it done last year. They didn't win. So now they've got put together $13 million. Okay, here's your money, coach. This is what you said you needed.
That's right. So allowed that third party. That was July of 21 or summer 21. Additional guidance then came out in October 22, where kind of stated that schools were restricted in terms of taking an active role in this. And that's now, kind of where we get to this letter to say, nope, schools are no longer restricted in taking active roles. You can be active. And not only can you be active, we're going to kind of open the playbook for you. Again, under this enhanced educational benefit definition, right? So that's what kind of got all of this, not kind of, that was a really big step in getting them to perform. Lots of other state stuff going on, but clearly when you have the Supreme Court coming out, I know you mentioned that in the last article where one of the justices just, I think, what was the comment? You're a walking antitrust violation or something like that. So
I'd like to...
go ahead. Okay. Yeah.
So I believe this is something I've been invested in for 10, 12 years or more. I think there are there's a lot of NCAA lawsuits that are really, really important. Mm-hmm. There's two major ones that have completely changed major college football and major college athletics. Yep. One, I think it was in 1983, there was a Supreme Court ruling that allowed schools and conferences to put all their games on TV. Basically gave them their own rights, took it away from the NCAA, gave it back to the schools, the universities, the conferences, for their TV rights, which allowed, because back then there were 2 games on a week, and unless you had a local news station that was covering it. So that led to an explosion in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and into today of putting schools on TV, which explosion of revenue got us to where we are today.
Right.
The second one is this one from 2021 that you bring up. Huge landmark case, and at the time, I said when this case came out, I put out on Twitter and I put on some of the Penn State message boards, this is huge. This is a game changer. It is going to cause a foundational shift. And I got some pushback from it because people are saying, oh, this is just educational benefits. But it isn't about just the merits of that particular case and what they were ruling on.
Yeah.
The justices were very clear. It was, I think, a 9-0 ruling.
It was.
And Justice Brett Kavanaugh, I like beers, Brett Kavanaugh, which we if you like beers, you should check out our Oktoberfest video.
That's right.
Awesome.
That's
Jude's
right.
having fun. So Justice I like beers, Brett Kavanaugh, wrote a concurrent opinion to the overall opinion.
Yeah.
Where he called the NCAA a walking antitrust violation, which I think that's where you're going with that.
Yeah.
Walking antitrust violation, and basically, in no uncertain terms, threatened them and said the next case that comes before our courts is likely going to be the one that brings down the entire NCAA, and you will no longer exist anymore. So you better change everything that you're doing. Your entire foundation is built on trying to get around federal antitrust laws, and you created this fake misnomer of an amateur student athlete just for your own purposes, which does not exist in U.S. law or in any industry or whatever. So you better clean up your act, NCAA, or you're not going to exist anymore the next time we hear a case about antitrust violations of the NCAA. So that was a huge game changer, a shot across the bow, 9-0, and where you have a one justice forcefully telling the NCAA they have to change or their very existence is threatened.
Yeah, ultimatum.
Yeah.
I mean, it's do or die time when you hear something like that, for sure. So the next thing I want to talk about, it's not a lawsuit. I mean, there's plenty of lawsuits. We could do a whole nother episode on different lawsuits. But I wanted to obviously bring up that one. As you said at the time, massive for the NCAA. It's why we're here right now. It's why we're doing this episode about what the heck's 2030 going to look like. But I do want to just bring up December 6th, recently, December 6th, 23. Bills have been introduced that would make student athletes employees and entitle them to labor and collective bargaining rights. This was done by Senators Murphy in Connecticut, Warren in Massachusetts, and Sanders in Vermont. I think also in the House by Bowman in New York. And that would just be huge. I mean, that's a whole nother episode, I think, about that. But I want to tie that back to the first point, talking about these educational benefits, talking about NIL. The educational benefits and NIL, to me, are not employee-based types of arrangements.
Agree.
This is taking this a whole nother, more than one step. This is a massive leap, and I'm not going to sit here and say it's right or wrong. I mean, we get into employment law and all that kind of jazz, and I don't want to do that. But I do want to just say that if you think this NIL stuff is crazy right now, making these student athletes employees is a whole different can of worms.
Yeah.
I mean, just I don't even want to. I want to bring it up because I think it's really important to what we're talking about. But again, that is a whole nother step in a massive direction, another way. And if the NCAA has to deal with that, again, they're way behind the 8 ball at this point. Now, it's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
I mean, it's a bill. I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill, good old Schoolhouse Rock from the day.
I'm just a bill.
He could sit there for forever. Who knows? But it's out there.
Yeah.
So a little bit of risk there.
So great point, and you bring up that bill. The overall issue of the employment issue, massive issue.
Yes.
Also, concurrently, right now, there's a case being heard in front of the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board.
Right.
It's about the players at USC, and so a federal labor judge is going to determine, and he is has been hearing arguments in the case, and is going to determine, are the USC football players employees or not? Okay, are they individual contractors?
Sure.
Whatever they are, and so I have zero faith that in the federal legislature that is going to come in and solve any problems or pass any new law on this. People, they can propose bills, like you said. Who knows how long that'll take? But courts move a lot faster, and
Yes.
labor courts specifically. So this could change overnight. By the time we publish this video, there could be a ruling in that NLRB case that makes USC players employees, which is going to be a game changer. So, but one thing I will caution is, I think a lot of times when fans just in people who are interested in college football, they talk about these issues, and they want to apply a uniform blanket all across to everybody. But that's really not necessarily the case. It may happen where in California and Chicago, whatever, certain schools, that certain players are employees.
Right.
And it may happen in other areas that they're not employees, depending on the situation, what the circumstances are. Also, you also have labor laws are very, very tricky. You have federal laws and you have state laws.
Yeah.
Okay, so in state law, so I'll tell you, in the state of Pennsylvania, if they were made employees of a public university, Penn State University, so then they would be public employees, there would be a whole bunch of laws that would govern them specifically as public employees.
Right.
Public employees in Pennsylvania, if I remember correctly, cannot collectively bargain for certain things. They can bargain for some things, not others.
Right.
And all kinds of states have different, Wisconsin has different labor rules, California. So it's important to remember, not everything, unless there is just one federal act that is passed. I have no faith that that's going to happen.
Right.
A federal law that is passed making all of them employees and setting a set standard. Most likely this will not be a blanket solution, that there will be some states might be employees, some states might not. And also, even if they are made employees, I think everyone assumes they're going to unionize and do all that. But you could very well, you and I were talking off camera before, you could see a situation where UCLA, Northwestern, Rutgers, where they unionize and become a union.
Right.
But then you have a situation where, let's say, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Texas, they don't unionize, and maybe just have a players association, but not a full players union.
Right.
So I think it's I don't believe we're going to see one blanket solution across the landscape, and that's going to be even tougher for the NCAA to navigate. Is if you have a different situations, employment situations, and union situations in different states.
Well, I have about 3 or 4 items here before we get to our conclusion of where will they be in 2030. I think some questions and maybe discussion points. Most of this we've kind of touched on, and maybe there's not more discussion to be had. The first thing I just want to say is, with that employment piece, does the NIL payments make the employment issue stronger? I don't know the answer to that, because on a high level, an employee is anybody getting paid to perform a service.
Right.
Now, again, very high level definition. There's obviously a lot more detail to that. But I say to that, okay, does getting paid because of NIL, because of a name, image, and likeness situation, now you're getting paid and we're allowing the institutions to now make these deals? Is it moving the envelope, or is it moving the line a little bit closer to that? In some states, I agree with you on the federal level, but in some states, is it moving it closer to that employment because they are receiving payment for a service?
I think it could.
Okay.
So here's the thing: if they actually do name, so what does NIL stand for? Name, image, and likeness.
Yes.
So if the university is publishing, let's say, a calendar, they got a team photo in January, they got the offensive line, whatever, and they're selling it, they're using it to raise money for the university. I think that's a true name, image, and likeness deal where they can pay the players for that. If what I think we're kind of seeing this at some of the schools already. If we're doing something where every player, no matter what they do, they're getting $50,000 or $60,000, $75,000. They're getting a base salary for being on the team and playing football, showing up to practice, whatever. To me, that is kind of a skirt around what name, image, and likeness is, because it's supposed to be licensing and marketing and all that stuff, to just paying players for being on the team. So I really think it depends, and so they're looking at that at USC. What are the players doing? What do they have to do? Can they quit the team? Can they not show up to practice? And will they still get their money if they use their picture to sell tickets, but they stop coming to practice? Do they still get their money? Like, those are the you have to look at every situation specific. So it could do that. It has the certain potential for that, but it depends on how the school is using their NIL funds.
Perfect. Great answer. So I'm going to stick on that NIL here and just throw something out there. I don't know if many people have thought about this, but let's talk a little bit of NIL with the transfer portal, right? And we're going to be doing some standalone episodes on the transfer portal and NIL. We're going to have a special guest come in. He's an agent and a lawyer. He's going to have the answers to this stuff, much more educated than what we will be. But I'm going to throw something out there and just say, what about multi-year NIL deals? And then you have a player that transfers to another university, another school to play football. Do those NIL transfer with that player? Because if they do, that sounds a heck of a lot like professional sports.
Yeah.
Like, Adidas is paying, or whoever, Nike is paying Jordan or whatever, and it's not necessarily that he's playing for the Bulls. They're paying Michael Jordan. So he can play for the Bulls, and then he can play for the Nuggets, and then he can play, or whomever. So, I got to throw that out there. That might be a little far away, but I think it's something that we're going to have to talk about. How does that transfer portal play into this?
Yeah, so the first thing is I think it's going to depend on the NIL deal. Again, it depends, okay?
Sure.
It depends. Is that money just coming from a school? Is it like a signing bonus? The school, hey, you come here, you get this much, whatever. Right. Most of the schools that I've heard from are doing it year by year, okay? They do a new deal every year. That's what they do, which is kind of smart, Hey,
and that makes sense to me. Like you're doing it for the year you're in, but will this expand to multi-year types of deals? I don't know.
It could, but I think most of the schools so far are smart and doing this year by year because they can't. The way the some of the state laws are written and the way that the current NIL rules are with the NCAA, and we did just see Florida get in trouble. I don't know if you saw this.
I did.
Florida got in trouble from the NCAA for how they incentivized their deal. It was more of a pay-to-play than a real NIL deal.
Okay.
So for now, I think they probably will continue their one-year deals and stuff like that. When it's money coming either directly from a school or not really technically from a collective that's associated with the school.
Yeah.
Now, there are other players that they have agents, similar lawyers, similar to the guy that you're going to interview.
Yep.
We're going to interview, that they go and get their own deals. There was a guy, Quinn Ewers, I think, had a Monster energy drink or health drink or whatever.
Yep.
They originally signed him when he was a Texas high school player coming out, and he was at Ohio State, and then he's back at University of Texas. That, I believe, was a long-term, multi-year deal. And where it didn't matter where he transferred. So, great point. We'll have to see how the transfer portal works out. The way it's structured now, the school can't pay them directly. However, if we move forward into this framework, then how would that affect the transfer portal? We sign this kid to a 4-year deal to come here. If we're allowed to pay them directly, then what happens if he transfers? Well, I'm guessing the way the contracts will be set up, there'll be some kind of a non-performance or whatever, or some kind of renew. I guess we'll have to see. And I think those are interesting questions for our lawyer that we'll have coming up.
So Kevin will be on, and he has done that. He has gone out and gotten certain companies that have said, I want to have this guy do this, and he's kind of that intermediary. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, how does this whole NIL thing even work between a company and an agent, and a player, and now maybe the school being in there? That obviously isn't quite in that yet. We're going to be doing some episodes on that, so I'm looking forward to see kind of his answers as to how does this actually work behind the scenes, because certainly people kind of think about how it might work, and some people probably have no clue how it works. Absolutely. I think he can answer some questions for us.
Absolutely right. I do have one more point to make.
Okay.
So you mentioned, I think the last part of your question is, you said, does this start to blur the line into professional sports?
Correct.
Well, here's the thing: is the line's already blurred. Okay. When I talked about earlier, we have a certain mindset. Okay. I'm going to call it old man thinking. Okay. That's just where we're at, our stage in life. And a lot of people, college football fans, most are between the age of 35 and 55. So we're right in the sweet spot where we think student athletes playing at Penn State, at Boise State are supposed to be amateurs and innocent and whatever, that's just not reality anymore. They are in all intents and purposes professionals. Okay, you and I saw this growing up with the Olympics,
right?
Back in I think the 80s or 90s. Before that, the Olympic athletes had to be complete amateur. If they accepted $1 from Wheaties, for a free box of cereal, they were banned from the Olympics.
Right.
Okay, and someone along the line figured out, this is pretty stupid because Russia is putting their athletes in the military, Soviet Union back then, and giving them a salary, but it's okay because they're in the military and their job in the military is play hockey or basketball or whatever.
Right.
And our athletes in the United States are paying their own way, and if Wheaties gives them a free box of cereal, they're banned from Olympic competition. So they realized that was stupid. They wiped that away. And the old man thinking back then was, oh my God, this is going to ruin the Olympics forever. No one's going to watch it. It's going to be terrible. Well, the Olympics are still as popular as ever. The Russians are still cheating like they are because they're cheating bastards. That's just how it goes. And everything's still about the same. But the figure skaters and the gymnasts and whatever can get their money from Wheaties, and it's no big deal. So that's kind of, we have to wrap our head around the thinking of we want to try and separate professional athletes from amateur athletes who are playing college football. And the reality is that's just not the case anymore.
Well, I have to throw out 2 words real quick because I know my father watches our episodes. This is exactly what he's thinking. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Jim Thorpe.
Yeah.
Look it up if you want to hear a little bit about what Steve's saying.
Yeah.
Anyway, next question I have is, could this arrangement, and I think you kind of alluded to this earlier on, and I think you're going to have another episode on this, but I just want to say it right now. Could this arrangement really lead to a split of D1 schools?
Yep.
I know there's a lot of hubbub about that. There's been a lot of rumors, especially here in the last week or two, about the SEC and the Big Ten, and they're going to split away from the NCAA and create their own conference and things. Looking at some of what you talked about in the letter, it somewhat leads me to believe that it is pushing towards, and I think that's the rumors, right? Yeah. It's pushing towards a split between some of this. I don't know if that's the case or not. I think we're going to have another episode that we address it. So I don't need you to answer it in depth, but
I can offer a couple points.
Okay.
So first of all, we have one of our big fans, Genetics. Okay. He's been on the War Chant boards. He's on Twitter, very famous Twitter account that talks about college football and realignment and all that stuff. Okay. I mean, from the very beginning, his whole kind of theory on this was everything that was in motion was basically going towards a Power 2 split off. Find him on Twitter. Just search Genetics, college football realignment. You'll find him. He talks about this extensively. And I think he's basically about 80% sold on, or at least 80 to 90% sold on, there's going to be a Power 2 split. We're going to do an episode as part of this series, the College Football 23 series. We're going to talk about that a little more in depth, and I'll offer some thoughts on that. Okay. But in this, so I'm not going to give you a definite answer now when you say could it.
Right.
But I will say this letter, that is a huge part of this. And I think, so the part B, and again, I think we were going to try and put this up at some point on the screen for our viewers.
Sure.
Part B, where it talks about this new subdivision and schools being able to opt into this, and it says work with your peer institution in this subdivision to create rules. So it talks about peer institutions.
Yeah.
So is that going to create multiple subclasses, multiple subdivisions within that, where you just have a Power 2, and then maybe you have the mountain, what we used to call the G5 schools, kind of create their own subdivision where they do this or not do this? I don't know. That's something to explore, but I think this lays the groundwork for it. I think those schools are going to have a decision to make. For Penn State and Michigan and Ohio State and Florida and Georgia and Alabama, it's going to be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But for schools like Boise, Fresno, New Mexico, University of Ohio, Toledo, help me out with some Sun Belt schools.
There's some great ones. Troy. There's
Western
so
Kentucky, all those schools that play good football over the years, but maybe can't financially do this or not. That's going to be that choice. This is basically creating a delineation point. You either got to choose you're going this way or you're going that way.
Right. And we actually had another commenter say he actually thinks there's going to be a Super 2, a Power 2, to your point, and then a kind of everybody else, right? So a Super 2, a Power 2, and another, whatever that would end up being. I don't know, 4, 5, whatever we have. The only other thing I'm going to point, and then we're going to get to it. Well, I know, this is a series. These are going to be heavy, long-winded, if you will, but there's a lot to dive into here. So I got one more question, and then we're going to get to where are we going to be at. The only thing I want to point out, and you said it in, the reasoning for B. So the B can really kind of alienate or split these conferences, the Super, the Power, the whatever. But also, Title IX is a massive concern here for anybody. So whether or not you're putting money into this trust or whatever the schools do, I mean, this whole equal opportunity for both male and female athletes, that's something every school has got to really, they all understand it. Obviously, we've been doing it for quite a while now, but they've really got to take this into account and say, okay, how are we going to manage this whole NIL issue and paying student athletes and what we're going to give them from their educational stuff. I just bring that up because I just feel like this could be another issue. Not that a school's going to, not follow Title IX, but I think it could, again, create that reasoning behind a pact or a top 2 and everybody else, or a top 4 or whatever the heck it's going to be. I know we've been saying P2. But I think the Title IX issue is another issue that you could see this split because of what they just have to do to be giving opportunities to everybody. So
totally agree with that. And here's the thing: so Title IX recently had a big anniversary, and I can't remember.
I don't.
Was it 30 years or whatever?
I don't know.
So our viewers out there, if you know how long Title IX's been around, give us a comment. Let us know. And I apologize to any of our female viewers not knowing how many years it's been around, but it was a big anniversary, Title IX. And so schools have had a long time to get used to operating under Title IX and not running afoul of Title IX.
Correct.
When you're dealing with scholarship limits, having enough opportunities for male and female students to play sports.
Right.
And, transportation budgets and all that kind of stuff. So they've gotten really good at that. But this whole plan really basically could upend the apple cart and change everything completely.
Exactly.
So
that's what I'm thinking.
That will be something I think it's important that Charlie Baker and his plan that he has a major part. Really, to me, there's 4 parts of this plan, and 25% of it is ensuring compliance with Title IX. Okay. So I think that's a great thing, and I agree with you. They will have to stay on this. And anytime you make changes to the landscape, to the operating rules, to the business rules of college football, you are going to have to take into account how does this affect Title IX to not run afoul of that, because you do not want a federal lawsuit or the U.S. Department of Education coming in and shutting you down for Title IX violations or taking away your programs, any of that stuff.
Right, and to give a quick example of that, you mentioned the calendar. So let's say there's a Penn State football swimsuit calendar that comes out, right? And they sell, I don't know, 100,000, but every player gets, I don't know, $10,000 because of this calendar. I'll make this pretty exaggerated. And then there's a female Tiddlywinks calendar, because I'm not going to crap on any female sports. I love all sports. So I'm getting into field hockey right now. But anyway.
Penn State field hockey?
But I'm not crapping on field hockey.
Okay,
we're going Tiddlywinks.
Okay, Tiddlywinks, all right.
Female Tiddlywinks, and they have their own calendar.
Yes.
And it only sells 1.
Right, okay.
So your Tiddlywink players are getting a penny.
Yeah.
And your football players, you did the same thing for each one.
Yeah.
But the football players are getting $10K.
Yeah.
That's the risk, I think, that you could have. And I'm simplifying this to some degree, but is that not what we're talking about?
So the big thing with Title IX is having the opportunities. It doesn't mean so like right now, when the Penn State, their football team travels, they fly on a big plane.
Yes.
And not their women's golf team doesn't necessarily do that. They might take a bus or whatever. So it doesn't have to be dollar for dollar equal. It has to be the same opportunities. So that's one thing. The other part is there's going to be shortages for female sports. That's just the way it goes. That's unfortunately, that's the reality. Women's basketball teams generally don't make as much revenue as men's basketball and whatever.
Sure.
So I do think this this plan coming up with this, investing this money is a way for schools to say, okay, there's not as much marketing money coming in for our women's programs as there is for our men's basketball and our college football. So we're going to take away some of that money that's coming in for college football and men's basketball, that revenue is coming in from those programs. We're going to take it, we're going to put it into another fund, and we're going to use that to give opportunities to our women's volleyball team, our women's soccer team, and all these other programs. So that this is one way. I don't know if this will end up the end-all be-all.
Right.
But it's a way to address that. Okay. So it'll be interesting to see how they move forward with that.
All right. Well, hey, we got to the point the conclusion of where we think the NCAA is going to be in 2030. Steve, you get to start.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to kind of lay out where I think we're going to be, and I'm interested to hear if you agree, disagree, if you whatever. So for me, I think that the NCAA will still exist, okay, as a clearinghouse unit, okay? There are a lot of Olympic sports and other sports where the NCAA is going to maintain a lot of value in organizing their championships and all of those things and rules and I think the NCAA will be able to still exist. I don't think the Supreme Court is going to totally shut it down because I have faith actually in Charlie Baker's leadership and that they're trying to change and do things different. So I think they're going to survive, okay? Right. Whether you call that a win or not, they're going to survive. Now, as far as college football is concerned, I think they're going to have a very diminished influence on college football. They already kind of have lesser influence. They don't really regulate the playoff or any of that kind of stuff. They're basically giving away their powers to set, if this plan goes through, they're giving away their powers to regulate scholarships, roster limits, recruiting, transfers, NIL, all of that stuff. They're giving it to the schools, to the universities, to the conferences. So I think that's where we're going to be at. I think the NCAA will still exist, and you may use them as a clearinghouse to get students' initial eligibility.
Right.
Check their grades, check their SAT scores. Did they graduate from a real high school and not a diploma mill? And they will have a very limited influence on Division I college football. I think that we will see a breakaway. We will see most of the schools opt in, I think, in Division I. I think even my gut instinct today is even Mountain West schools of Boise will opt into this. It's going to be tougher for them than it will be for Penn State, but I think they will opt into this because they want to stay in that relevant picture. They want to compete for a college football playoff and all that stuff. So I think you'll see most of the Division I schools opt into this program, which basically gives them autonomy over almost everything.
Sure.
And so I think they will exist, but with very limited capacity with college football. But I think they will still have a major impact on, you go to the NCAA.org website and you see all the things they do. They set up the volleyball championships, the swimming championships, all of these very important programs, sports that there's thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of student athletes, which we can call real student athletes, that are participating in these programs across the country, and the NCAA will still play a very important role in that, but a very small role in college football, maybe initial eligibility and little things like that. But, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, will the NCAA exist? And I would have told you no, they're not even going to exist. They're not even going to be a thing. They are going to be a footnote on a page of history because the next case in the Supreme Court was going to blow them up. But I do think with this leadership and this plan moving forward, it will allow them to survive.
Yeah. I actually agree with you on that. And just so everybody knows, Steve and I don't talk about these things. If you've seen our episodes before, we kind of do our own research. We high-level planning beforehand. I think that's probably why our discussions are maybe interesting to people because it's not completely laid out what we're going to be saying, unless I'm reading something from a lawsuit or something.
Right.
But I agree with you. I think the NCAA will still be around, and it's clear that they had to do something, or they wouldn't have been, and they have. Now it's the very first step. I'm anxious to see over the next year or two, this letter kind of form into more detailed types of things. Now, I agree that a lot of that control, a lot of that power is going to go to the universities. But I still think, I mentioned some things earlier on where I'm kind of anxious to see if there's any lines drawn. Now, if there are lines drawn, does that get them in trouble again? I don't know.
Right.
But I'm anxious to see if they do put some sort of more detailed descriptions on some of these things and what these things mean. And I also agree. I think Charlie Baker has taken the necessary first step. A lot of steps yet to come if they're going to be around in 2030. But I think we both have the opinion that he will and they will still be around. The football piece that you mentioned, I just struggle with that. And it gets a little bit into, I don't want to give away other stuff, but, does the Power 2 split off? And do they become more of a private entity. That part, I'm not gonna give my they're going to or no they're not. I certainly hope they don't. I mean, again, we're talking about student athletes. They're there for the university for the most part. There's some that are going on to the NFL and wherever they're going to be going. But, I don't know what the percentage is, but you mentioned that earlier. These are student athletes. I think that needs to be our focus here, and not on, I hate to say the extreme, but, somewhat of the extreme. So I'm just going to rely on you for the football analysis that you gave, because I don't have a good feel for that, but I do agree the NCAA is going to be around in 2030.
So I want to add kind of an additional thought.
Okay.
Where I'd like to get our viewers kind of thinking about this. So I've said on here, I think the NCAA's capacity will be diminished as it relates to college football. Here's just kind of a thing for people to think about. So you brought up the employment issue. So let's kind of play that out just as kind of continue the discussion to be a good thing for our viewers to comment on. So let's say they are ruled employees, okay? Right. And we do have some kind of collective bargaining. Let's say we get the power to that do a collective bargaining.
Right.
We actually, that might, for those who loved the old system of the NCAA, where you had roster limits, you had caps, a salary cap, so to speak, where they couldn't give them extra benefits or whatever, that actually may be a mechanism where players get some benefits, they get some money, whatever, but there are hard caps.
Sure.
And here's the thing with collective bargaining, is the federal courts give CBAs, collective bargaining agreements, wide latitude. They can break all of the antitrust laws they want because both sides are agreeing to it.
Right.
So just something to think about. Personally, I don't want to see the players become employees.
Right.
If they do, though, and if there is some kind of collective bargaining agreement, we could see a return to very similar rules to what we all grew up with and enjoyed how college football operated over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, where there is a level playing field, kind of like we see in the NFL. There's a salary cap,
right.
There's free agency, and you have to stay with a team a certain amount of time before you're eligible for free agency. So if you want to see rules like that, Supreme Court has said the NCAA can't do that.
Right.
If you want to see rules like that, that might be a method, a way to see it. So that'll be interesting. Are they ruled employees? If so, do they do a CBA? And if they do, does that bring back a similar structure and system that what we've seen in the past?
My high level opinion on that is, if you want a junior NFL, make a junior NFL.
I see your point on that.
And if you're not going to make a junior NFL, then let's make sure we're holding our student athletes to that level of what we expect from a student athlete. They're not in the junior NFL.
Right.
They're a student athlete. I get it. There's billions of dollars that we're talking about.
Yep.
But they're still student athletes. And if you want to make them an employee, a for-profit entity, junior NFL, that sucker. That's my high-level stupidity brain talking.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of us would probably like to see a system like what you're describing. We'd rather see the rules in place that keep them as student athletes, keep them affiliated with the school. Go to school, graduate, get your degree. I think the problem we're running into that we're seeing is no one's allowed to make those rules anymore because the Supreme Court said no.
I understand. So anyway, hey, I think that's it for this. Is there anything else you want to talk about, Steve?
No, I think that's it. I'm really excited about our upcoming episodes in this series. So I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we got this conversation going.
Yep. So this was the one that we got out early February. Our next one will drop in early March. It's going to be about the playoffs and where we think the college football playoffs are going to be in 2030. So if you want to see just an introduction to this series, we do have that one posted. You can go back and just hear about where we want to go with this over the next 4 or 5 months. But we really thank you guys for watching. If you stuck it out to the end, we appreciate it. We love comments. As Steve said, this is about a discussion. This isn't about Steve and JY saying this is 100% accurate and how it's going to be. Nobody knows how it's going to be. We would love to hear from you guys. Make sure you throw some comments down below. Make sure you give us a like. Make sure you give us a subscribe. Way more to come on College Football 2030. We'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.
Remember to Google Jim Thorpe.